Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, where I discuss Brazil from the perspective of race. Now, I just recorded and I just released my first video on YouTube for many years. And for my first videos, I thought I'd just offer a few introductions to some of the concepts that I'll be discussing periodically, and just to get an idea of how race works in Brazil. Because if you've never been to Brazil, you've never lived to Brazil, some of these concepts will sound similar, but then at the same time, they'll sound a little bit different. So I wanted to just to start, just to give some ideas or just to share some experiences, share some, let's say, discourse, some representations, some articles of how race is dealt with in Brazil on a daily basis. So to get into that, what I wanted to start with today was this article that I did some years ago. And most of the articles that I will refer to come from my source blog, which is called Black Women of Brazil. You can find more than 3,000 articles there at blackwomenofbrazil.co. I am also the editor and the content producer of that blog. So if you've ever, I know there's a lot of people that follow my blog, but if you're not familiar with it, there's a lot of material there that just give you an idea of what the experience is of being Black in Brazil, told from the perspective of just a lot of Black Brazilians, sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists, people who study race in Brazil. That's what they do. And I've been following Brazil from a perspective of a comparative analysis between Brazil and other countries, particularly the United States, as I am from the United States. Now, when you get into studying issues of race in Brazil, one of the first things you're going to run into is this idea that Brazil is somehow a racial democracy. It's like, it's one of the first things you're ever going to hear about. And it's, if you just punch in the term racial democracy, for example, you'll find just an assortment of all sorts of articles of people just claiming that, there's no racial problems in Brazil, unlike the United States. It's like, when I first got into this, when I first started studying this, like late 99, early 2000, I'm like, how is it that, well, let me just do some investigation first. So if you go to just Google and punch in the term racial democracy in Brazil, you'll come across just, probably hundreds of articles, because this is an idea that's existed in Brazil for many years. You can punch it if you read English, just punch in racial democracy in Brazil. Or if you read Portuguese, you could just punch in democracia racial. Either language, you'll find it, and you'll see all of these articles pop up where this idea of a racial democracy is debated. It's been debunked, but for many years, people who were studying race in Brazil they got into studying Brazil from the idea that it was a racial democracy. Some of the studies that started off in Brazil started like in the late 1940s with UNESCO, sometime a few years after the ending of World War II. And at that time, a number of anthropologists, sociologists were, assigned to investigate Brazil's alleged racial democracy. You had sociologists, anthropologists from Europe, you had many from the United States, and you had many from Brazil to investigate this. Like, okay, let's look into Brazil's famous racial democracy and see what we find. And starting from about the mid to late 40s into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, what you found is that numerous anthropologists, sociologists just exposed, like, there's no racial democracy here at all. It has never existed. They trace the idea of a racial democracy. Let's just say a racial democracy is saying that we're all equal here. Everybody here has the same opportunity as anybody else, regardless of your skin color or your race. It's not an issue here, like it is in the United States or a place like South Africa, where Brazil is often compared to. They're compared to the United States and South Africa because you have these multiracial societies. And they wanted to investigate, well, how is it that United States and Brazil are both based on a slavery economy, and they wanted to see how, in comparison to what you saw in apartheid in South Africa, well, how did Brazil achieve a racial democracy when all of these other countries were not able to do that? But what we find is that Brazil's racial democracy mythology is somewhat equal to the equal opportunity idea in the United States. It sounds good on paper, but then when you investigate the differences in race, the social economic situations of white and non-white people, specifically Black, and that whole idea of egalitarian society, it just disappears. It blows away. So this is one of the things you always have to deal with when you're looking into the issue of race in Brazil. When I first started getting into studying this, I just remember participating in some online discussions where race was the topic. And inevitably what you'll get is a lot of now I'm talking like the year 2000. You'll get just like hundreds of Brazilians will enter into the discussion talking about, oh, we don't have racism here. That's a problem there. We've been mixing here for years. Interracial marriage is pretty common around here. I'm part Black. My great grandfather was Black, and you hear all of these excuses. But then when you delve a little bit deeper into the surface of these arguments, like I say, they kind of fall apart, because you don't base racial egalitarianism just based on, well, we have interracial marriage here. Well, you guys in the United States and those in South Africa, you had legalized apartheid, racial segregation. You had interracial marriage that was prohibited for many years in the United States. But what I come to discover years after years of looking into this idea, it just goes to show that Brazil's type of racism is a little more sophisticated. The lack of legal segregation is something that they use to their advantage when these comparisons between the United States, Brazil, and South Africa will come up. We don't have that here, right? But then when you look into it, when you look at all of the data, you see the difference in social economic opportunity between Blacks, or rather, let's just say whites and non-whites here. And you see a clear difference when you turn on Brazilian TV and you see mostly white faces, when you see that all of the powerful politicians in Brazil are all mostly white. And when I say white here for Brazil, I mean people who are clearly white, and then those people who would probably only be white in Brazil or in Latin America, because you don't necessarily have to be just clearly 100% white in Brazil to be considered white. So anyway, this is why I wanted to discuss this, because these first videos are going to be like my introduction to base the rest of the videos that I record, so you can get a concept of what I'm talking about here. So again, besides my blog, you can go to just numerous articles online. You can go to academic research. There's numerous books where researchers have just totally debunked this idea of a racial democracy. And for many years, you get the same idea from Brazilians who just refuse to deny this, or rather, they refuse to acknowledge that racial inequality is a problem in Brazil, because, oh, we don't have those racial problems. And I'm like, I've been blogging about this since about November of 2011. And before that, I actually had a bilingual blog. So this isn't something that my idea with creating this blog is, okay, well, when I voice my opinion, they always want to just dismiss my views as just, you racist Yankee North American, you know nothing about Brazil. So what I said was, I'm going to get material and I'm going to cite what Brazilians themselves are saying. That was always, I'm like, okay, this is not your racist American talking about this. People who are honest enough to discuss race from perspective, a racial perspective in Brazil, there's hundreds, if not thousands, tens of thousands of articles out there and books from American, Brazilian, and European scholars that just show, like, how can you deny this? So anyway, let me start off to give you an idea of what I mean about this idea of denial that Brazil is a racist country. This is an article I posted from April of 2014, and it's called Racist Who Me? 92% of Brazilians believe racism exists, but only 1.3% consider themselves racist. Now, I want to go through this article today because recently there's been another study that came out basically asking the same question, asking people, do you believe Brazil is racist? Well, would you consider yourself to be racist? And between 2014 and now, I've seen a considerable difference. Not so, there's more people who admit that racism is a problem in Brazil, but there's also more people who openly admit that they harbor racist sentiments. And this is something that I've seen seem to have risen since the election of a extreme right-wing president named Jair Bolsonaro. I won't get into that right now, but let's get into this study from 2014. 92% of Brazilians believe racism exists, but only 1.3% consider themselves racist. Now, Brazil can be quite confusing to understand at times. How does one explain such strong evidence of racism throughout the country, the near invisibility of Afro-Brazilians in most areas of society, yet a high rate of interracial marriage in persons of mixed ancestry? Welcome to Brazil. With all of the reports featured on this blog, we hope you can understand that racism can exist even within interracial marriage, and even if people deny that they are racist. As one writer put it, the details hidden within interracial marriage can actually be seen as more evidence of racial inequality and a long-standing racial hierarchy. The following report is also interesting in that it shows that nearly 20 years later, things haven't changed much in Brazil. Now, this is something that I need to get into because I've covered this a lot in the last eight and a half years or so. One of the main ideas that you hear in Brazil of why racism can't exist here is because you have far more interracial marriage here in Brazil than you have in the United States at any period in history. So, but when you look into that, you find again, like, this is more mythology. This is one of the articles that, again, this article is also from 2014. It's from February 2014. It's called Cirilo's Syndrome Part 2. And it's actually a follow-up to another article. Now, the name syndrome, or the name Cirilo syndrome, somebody created this idea because it was based on a character on a popular, like, children's novella soap opera here. And in that novella, this black kid, he's one of the few black people on this particular children's novella. And it was like, he was always shown to be chasing after this little white girl. I think he was probably between like 8 and 12 years old on this show. And he was just at the beck and call of this little white girl on the show. And it was just like, when people started looking into why it is that it seems so many black men and black people in general seem to like break their necks to try to get into relationships with people of whiter skin. So, somebody coined the term Cirilo's syndrome. Now, this is part 2. The psychological damage on a child when a white parent in an interracial marriage is racist. And this is a woman's recollection of growing up in being the child of an interracial marriage, where she said how her father, in Brazil, when you see interracial marriage, the structure of society is basically the same as you see in the United States in terms of the hierarchy. You have white men on top, followed by white women, black men, and black women. So in general, what many sociologists have argued is that black people will trade their stigma, which is blackness, and they'll marry a white person of the lower classes as if it's kind of a trade. The white person trades their lower social status, and the black person trades their blackness, both being, stigmas in society, and they meet in the middle. But what you find is that regardless of whether somebody's willing to marry somebody across racial lines, this does not automatically mean that this person is not racist. In this particular article, the girl just goes into her memories. Now, as a child, you may not notice this. You may not know what's going on. But, as you grow and you get educated and you become privy to certain knowledge, you come to understand, like, my mother used to call my father all sorts of racist names. My mother stated openly, like, she married my father because she didn't have any other options. I think in this particular article here, matter of fact, here it was right here. She's talking about her mother. And she says her mother was a Northeastern immigrant in the capital city of Brasilia, and she worked as a maid. And as my father was interested in her, I believe that she saw in him a way out of the situation in which she lived, because at the time, my father worked and earned considerable money, certainly more than a maid. Not to mention the story she still tells today of what she went through in the madam's house, speaking about her employer. What seems to have happened, what seems to have happened was a kind of tacit agreement that my mother would lend to my dad the social mobility that his image of a white woman represented, and my father would offer her a springboard out of a life without any expectation of improvement and advancement, since my mother, after all, is illiterate. So here, I mean, in that one little paragraph, that explains a lot to what's going on here. Her father had an education. Her mother was illiterate. She worked as a maid, but he married her, obviously simply because, well, because this woman is white, and her whiteness offers a certain, let's say, social advancement for him. So regardless of what her social status was, marrying her is still considered marrying out of, improving your situation socially. So this is a prime example of why we see so many interracial couples in this country. It's not so much that people can't fall in love or whatever, but my argument is always, it's not always a situation where you just meet somebody, you fall in love. People measure each other by many different factors. It's not just, oh, I'm attracted to him. A lot of people will look into it, like, what kind of education does this person have? What kind of car? What neighborhood did this person live in? So we need to get away from this idea of, I just fell in love. I've seen people like, look, I do this type of work. I'm not going to marry somebody lower than myself on the social ladder. So, the same thing works there. The same thing works in Brazil. So in this scenario, you see clear ulterior motives going on here. It's like, okay, I want to marry a white woman to fit my social status as a black man. And the white woman is illiterate, working as a maid. She's not going to get a high status white man, but she can get from the cream of the crop of the black man. So this is what you see going on here. And I have a number of articles where over the last, I'm going to say 6 or 7 years, people have been digging into this idea that because you have a lot of interracial marriage, that this somehow proves that you don't have racism in this society. That's just one article. I got a lot more to go through. Let's see here. According to a widely divulged 1995 study, 89% of Brazilians said that there is prejudice against blacks, while only 10% admitted to harboring these sentiments themselves. In the same survey, 87% of those same people revealed some prejudice by agreeing with racist comments or sayings. In other words, everyone agrees that racism exists and that they know racist people, but few people actually confess to being racist. A 1988 study conducted in Sao Paulo found that 97% of those interviewed said that they didn't harbor any prejudiced feelings, while 98% of those same people said they knew prejudiced people. Commenting on this contradiction, anthropologist Lilia Moritz Schwartz, I think that it's supposed to be Moritz Schwartz, said that every Brazilian seems to feel like they are an island of racial democracy surrounded by racists on every side. Now, just to go back on this idea that somehow, well, because we have interracial marriage here, then how can we be racist, particularly when so many Brazilians are of mixed race? But like I said, people have been actually looking into that also. In this particular article, the guy was saying how interracial marriages are one of the most glaring symptoms of Brazilian racism. This is a popular samba singer here named Tiaguinho, and his girlfriend at the time they got married. I think their marriage recently ended, if I'm not mistaken. Have to look into that. But what we're going into here, this guy's argument is that the high rate of interracial marriage among prominent black people actually shows that it's actually more proof of a racist society, because the black person uses their social status in order to just have a union with a white person of lower status. So what I'm seeing here is that instead of black people marrying other black people and then, creating more prominent black couples, those black people end up marrying white people of lower class status. And then they set the ideology of whitening, they put it in progress. Because what happens is they'll produce the child will come out mixed. Because there's so few black people in the middle classes in Brazil, they'll live in mostly white middle class areas. And so then who is that mixed child going to most relate to as they grow up, being in a primarily white neighborhood? So what we see here is this constant distribution of wealth, where within 2 to 3 generations, this, whatever that black person who went to college, they could end up being a lawyer, a doctor, or a soccer player, whatever they might be. But they marry someone white, produce a mixed child who grows up in a majority white neighborhood. Within 2 to 3 generations, that money goes right back to the white community. So this is kind of how even Edward Tellis, who has done a lot of studies about race in Brazil, some of the same conclusions that he came to. Yes, there are many interracial couples in Brazil, interracial marriages in Brazil, but in most of them, 5 out of 6, according to the book, Race in Another America, The Significance of Skin Color in Brazil by Edward Tellis, the black spouse in a marriage has superior socioeconomic status. The phenomenon has already been studied in other societies as racist as ours, and in English it's called status exchange in interracial marriage. So this is what this guy is pointing to here. The marital data revealed by Tellis suggests that due to structural racism in our society, black spouses would have a perceived status so low in the marriage market that he would be obliged to pay a high price for advantageous marriages. In other words, marrying up with whiter or lighter partners. In a way very economically real, his color would have a disadvantage so large it needs many other countervailing benefits, as in higher education, higher income, etc., in order to compete on equal footing. The guy in this picture, this is actor Darlan Cunha. He was famous from the famous 2002 film Cidade de Deus, or City of God. And this is just the thing that you'll find over and over again in Brazilian society, where people have argued that it's only black males that participate in this, but the further you look into this, you find this is on both sides. When you find black people of prominence or higher status in Brazilian society, generally they're married to white partners. So to me, this basically backs up the point. People will argue away and say, well, love has no color. And I would ask, well, if love has no color, how come it seems like 98% of black people, prominent black people, high salaries or fame, fortune, or whatever, why is it seems like 98% of them are married to white people? That's just a question. We have to ask ourselves that question. It's a legitimate question to ask, beyond this idea that, well, love has no color. Well, there's a lot of factors involved in marriages besides just love. Let's be real about that. Also consistent with material regularly featured on this blog, the study shows how common it is to offend Black Brazilians with the term macaca or macaco, meaning monkey, while another Black woman expresses her annoyance with the widespread idea that if a person is considered pretty or beautiful, said person cannot be considered Black. Such is life in a racial democracy. Now, that's something else that I have to mention here, and I've seen this. It's amazing. It's like in the United States, when you hear someone use a racist term, is usually like the N-word, or occasionally you hear somebody refer to a Black person as, like a gorilla, a monkey, something like that. Here in Brazil, macaco or macaco is the chosen word of choice to humiliate a Black person. It's like you always hear some incident of somebody white calling somebody a monkey, calling a Black man or a Black woman a monkey. I've got just, I can't even report on these all the time because I can't. If I could host a whole blog just on how many times you see this in Brazilian society. This is just, just looking at the key term macaco or monkey, and you'll just see just numerous articles. What's funny is that we also have to look into this idea of Black on Black and like Black self-hatred. This first particular article was a reality show contestant, this Black woman. And while they were filming this reality show, she heard someone call her a monkey. Said, "Sit down over there, you macaca." And it turned out in that particular incident, it was actually a Black male that called her that. But then you have just numerous cases over and over. Black congressmen called a monkey, big nose, by this person. Go ahead, call the police. This woman was just like insulting this Black street vendor, called him a monkey several times. 2 different incidents, Black doorman and food delivery man called monkey, Black bastard. Let's see here. Look, 3 different states, 3 different incidents. Brazil's preferred term to insult its Black citizens continues to be monkey. And it just goes on and on and on. I mean, all of these, I mean, as you can see, it's like at least 14 pages, probably more. And it just goes on and on. You hear about, this term macaca being tossed around to black people all the time. So where's the racial democracy in that? Let's get back to this article that I was discussing. The actual article was called "Brazilians Think That Racism Exists, but Only 1.3% Consider Themselves Racist." This book that's in the photo here is saying racist. Me? No way. This is by a popular cartoonist named Mauricio Pestana. Let's just get into the article. I can discuss him another time. He's another person who's important and this giving black people more attention in the media. But anyway, this is from an article from the Correio Brasiliense newspaper. An article in this newspaper presents an unprecedented survey of racial prejudice in Brazil. Individually, the Brazilian has the habit of saying that he or she is not biased, but is convinced that she lives in a country in which people are discriminated against on the basis of skin color. This profile is part of an unpublished research to which the Correio Brasiliense newspaper had access. Prejudice is a common mark in the daily lives of Brazilians. It's in homes, it's in schools, and in the work environment. Preliminary data from an unpublished research of the Data Popular Institute put the myth of racial democracy to the test. The study, nearing completion, shows that although 92% of Brazilians believe there is racism in the country, only 1.3% consider themselves to be racist. The Institute estimated that 92 million, 68.4% of adults have witnessed a white Brazilian refer to a black person as a macaco or monkey. This goes back to what I was saying about how common it is to hear somebody be called a monkey in Brazil. And of these, only 12% took some action. The survey also shows that 1 in 6 white men did not want their daughter to marry a black man. Now, you might look and say, 12%, that's no big deal. Only 12% of white men don't want to see their daughters marry black men. Well, again, let's be honest about this. If you're not going to admit that you're racist, how many people are going to admit that they wouldn't want their daughter to marry a non-white person? So I would even question that also. Once again, the idea that interracial marriage has always been accepted in Brazil, again, when you look into the history, that's not necessarily so. You find like 50 and 60 years ago, you had a lot of white Brazilians who did not want to see their children married to black people. You go back like to the 1960s, early 1960s, it was only like maybe 8% of Brazilians were married outside of their race. And of course, it's significantly grown since then. But I'm just saying the idea that there's never been a race issue in terms of who you choose to marry, that's just not true. There's plenty of information out there. There's plenty of books out there that document. And once again, it begs the question, how do you present this mythology? And then on the other side, the social studies actually show, well, no, that's not actually true. People believe it to be so. People, divulge the idea that this is true. But again, when you look into the data, when you look into the studies, this is not actually what's going on, particularly when it involves a black male and a white woman. And I've got some really interesting cases of some famous black Brazilian men and some of the issues they went through being married to white women like 30 and 40 years ago. But that's going to be in a future article. Like I say, I've delved into this idea of interracial marriage here for a long time. So I'll get to that at a future date. Racism is a crime with no father and no mother. They say that it exists, but don't admit that they are racist. People want to put this racial democracy as part of the culture of Brazil, but it is a lie. It is a farce created, and every day we need to deconstruct it. It is important that society see that citizenship and democracy will never be developed as long as we live with this type of crime, says Carlos Alberto Jr., ombudsman of the Secretario de Políticas de Promoção de Igualdade Racial, translated, Secretariat for the Promotion of Racial Equality, or CEPIR is the name of this organ. The Cláudia case, in the first place, is not an isolated case. Unfortunately, it happened, but fortunately, it was recorded. Such cases have happened almost systematically, and that is what we are fighting, says the ombudsman. I'm gonna get into that in a minute. You must be asking, like, well, who was Claudia? I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. The shock of how Cláudia da Silva Ferreira was rescued by military police in Rio de Janeiro was echoed in Brasilia, again, the capital city of Brazil. An act against racism scheduled for the end of the afternoon at the Praça Zumbi dos Palmares Square in front of CONIC pays tribute to the Brazilian woman victimized by a society that authorizes that Blacks are murdered daily, as says the note that summons people to attend the demonstration. She is no longer and became the dragged woman. The fact that she lost her name says a lot, exemplifies Naida Lida, who will be at the event. Now, this Claudia case, what I'm talking about here is an incident that happened back, it must have been about 2014, if not mistaken. It was just, it was just shocking to see what happened to this woman. Now, in Brazil, you always see in situations where Brazil's military police are some of the most violent police in the world. They go into poor neighborhoods called favelas here, and they go in shooting, always under the excuse of we're fighting drug traffickers. Drug traffickers always make like a small percentage of the population in favelas. A study I had read from back, I don't know, maybe 2005 or 6 was like, well, it's like less than 1% of the favela population is actively involved in any type of drug trafficking. So, but so many people who have no connection to drug trafficking are the ones that end up catching stray bullets or being killed for being mistaken for being a drug dealer or whatever. This particular case happened I reported on it in March of 2014. Black woman shot dead. Her body is dragged on the ground, attached to the bumper of a police car. I mean, it was just shocking to see. If you can see this picture, I'm gonna blow this up a little bit more, and hopefully there's still video available. I think I actually saved this video, but this was just a horrific act. Cláudia da Silva Ferreira was shot in the Morro do Congonha in the Madureira area of Rio de Janeiro. Police put her in the trunk of the car to take her to the hospital. So this is what happened. 3 military police officers who rescued Cláudia da Silva Ferreira, who was 38, are under arrest, as shown in the Bom Dia Rio report. This is Monday, the 17th of that month and that year. The cleaning assistant died after being hit by stray bullets in the neck and the back during a police operation against drug trafficking in the region. Witnesses reported that Cláudia was placed in the trunk of the police car to be taken to the hospital. However, along the way, the trunk opened and the woman's body fell out of the trunk of the car and was dragged down the street on the cement. The military police opened an inquiry into the facts and reported that the officers involved were being heard in the morning of the precinct of judicial police, and then will be forwarded to the Batalha Especial Prisional of the military police. The Extra newspaper published on that Monday a video made by an amateur video maker showing the woman being dragged about 250 meters. 250 meters, that's like over 800 feet. 800 feet, that's almost 3 football fields. Just imagine this. This woman's body fell out of the back of a police van. Her body fell out of the trunk, the back door trunk popped open. Her body fell out, and it was hanging from the back of the police vehicle, hanging by her clothing. And they dragged her body for almost 3 football fields, hanging from the bumper of the car by a piece of her clothing. Let's see. According to her husband, she was going to buy 3 reais of bread and 3 reais of bologna, but she didn't have to go, said Claudia's husband, who referred to remain anonymous for security reasons. Whenever people report on brutal police actions, they are always hesitant to show their face or give their real name because they fear that the police will retaliate against them. Cláudia Silva Ferreira was 38. She was the mother of 4 children, and she raised 4 nephews. So this was just a horrific story. Let's see, how does it go? According to the military to police, the police did an operation in the community. There was a shootout with drug dealers, and the cleaning assistant was shot. Again, she caught a stray bullet. Soon after, angry residents protested against the police action. 2 buses were set on fire. So this was just like a horrific incident. Realizing what happened, police recovered the body and put it back in the vehicle. This was, I mean, I hate to say it, but people have become accustomed to seeing black bodies just fall on the ground being shot in police actions. But this really shook people up. And as it should, the woman's body fell out of the police car. I mean, you can see the picture again. The woman's body fell out of the police car and she was dragged for the length of almost 3 football fields from the trunk of the car. It's just repugnant. This type of thing, just the value of black life just doesn't exist, because military police don't enter ritzy or middle class white neighborhoods with the same violence that they like enter into favelas. So that's all of these stories that I put up here. I'm gonna, I'll provide the links to in the description box of this video, because there's so much information here. It's just like, again, what part of racial democracy do you see here? Okay, so referring to the woman who made the last comment, Nyada is not accustomed to putting aside racial slurs, however small. A compliment, however, bewilders the singer. You're not black, you're beautiful. The comment shocked Nyada. I can't be black and beautiful? How absurd this conception is. I couldn't respond at the time, she laments. According to the middle-class woman, society is not yet accustomed to the social mobility of millions of black people. When I, female and black, walk into a place of greater social or greater economic access, people have certainty that I can only be there working as a maid or a servant. Frequently wearing a turban, Nyada says that the simple adornment now causes change in how she is treated. When I walk into a place wearing a turban, I become a foreigner, a gringa, as they call them here. I stop being black. I'm treated much better until they discover that I'm Brazilian. Now, this is Nyada, okay? This is the woman talking about this. She's saying that as a black woman, if she walks into an area where black people are not assumed to have the social economic status to be able to, make purchases in these certain areas, they're questioning like, what are you doing here? Like, you're black. How are you shopping here? It's always amazing to me where I have worked in this city. It's amazing when you walk into office buildings or you go into like middle-class apartment buildings here. It's like you always see the servants being black, whether they're the cleaning women, they're the maids, whoever it is. It's like, I've been all over this city, and I'm not saying, obviously, I'm not going to account for 10 million people that live in Sao Paulo, but I am saying this is something that I've noticed all the time. If it's a upper crust neighborhood and you see a black woman, you expect that she's the cleaning lady. When there are black women or black families that live in these neighborhoods, it's a common joke here. Somebody opens the door, a salesman or whoever it is, and they'll be like, well, may I speak to the lady of the house? Because if a black woman opens the door, it's automatically assumed she must be the maid of the house. So this is what I talk about when I say a racial hierarchy in Brazil, because it's just expected that if you're black and you're in certain areas, whether you're in an upper crust shopping mall or you're in an upper crust neighborhood, you must be the servant, right? And so going back to what she said, society is not accustomed to the social mobility of millions of blacks. This is another article that I did. Let's see when it pulls up here. It has to be from, I want to say 2014. Oh, actually, this is from 2012, where it says 80% of Brazil's new middle class is black, and upper middle class consumers are none too pleased about it. This is a family from a TV novella from some years ago called Rebelde. And this article just goes into talking about let's see, approximately 80% of new members of the Brazilian middle class are black. Over the past decade, we're talking, between 2012 and 2010, during the reign of the Workers' Party government, over the past decade, the middle class grew by 38% and now represents 53% of the population, which means about 104 million Brazilians, with 80% of the new members of the middle class being black or brown. Now, understand, those numbers are a little bit skewed, because what do you consider middle class in Brazil? I know that if you're making 2 minimum salaries in Sao Paulo, that's not middle class, because Sao Paulo is an extremely expensive city to live in. So these numbers are a little bit skewed because they wanted to give the appearance that more people entered the middle class than there actually are. But even so, between 2002 and say 2014, you saw a significant number of black people having economic access to things that they never had before. When I first started visiting Brazil, I remember getting off the plane in the Guarulhos airport, which is the international airport here in Sao Paulo, and not seeing any black people. Like, where are the black people in this airport? I got off a plane in JFK, where you see JFK in New York, where you see all sorts of people from all over the world at JFK airport. And then I get off a plane in Guarulhos in the Brazilian equivalent. And it's like, I'm talking the year 2000, 2001. You just didn't see that many black people, not even working there really. But I started seeing a little change starting in, I'd say about 2007, 2008, where you started seeing more black people having the means to catch flights. You saw more black people just being at the airport. So this is something I can attest to because I actually saw it. But the point is here, I've seen numerous reports of black people themselves have made how they hear these, under the breath comments of like white people not being comfortable with seeing black people in areas that they're not expected to be. Data indicate that the extension of the new middle class bothers upper and upper middle class consumers. It's just basically saying like, you're not expected to be here. The association with darker skin comes with a socioeconomic, let's say, assumption that you're poor, so you're not supposed to be here. So this is what this article goes into here. Again, I'm going to leave these. I'm going to leave all of these articles in the links below in the description box, because it's just, I've seen this again and again. Like, you're not supposed to be here. Why are you here? I just did a matter of fact, an article I just did yesterday talked about this very thing of this black woman who grew up in a middle class neighborhood, and people constantly talking to her as if she was the maid, when they encounter her in her own home. Or, if they knock on the door and she answers the door and says, well, who are you? What are you doing here? And they talk to her like she's the cleaning lady. Anyway, getting back to this article. Lucas Barbosa, 23, a temporary public school teacher in the federal district of Brasilia, again, the nation's capital, was approached by military police when he returned to the University of Brasilia, where he completed his second degree. Leaning on a motorcycle in Eixo Monumento, he was searched and offended by jokes. They asked me where I lived, if I was a criminal, if I was dealing drugs at UNB, this is the University of Brasilia. I said that the approach was wrong. They stopped me for the wrong reason. They searched me again. They took my jacket. They put marijuana in it. The only plausible explanation is racism and discrimination against the periphery. And we say periphery, meaning areas outside of the city's downtown, because the closer you get to Brazilian downtowns, the fewer black people you're going to see. Black people are expected to live in what's called the periphery or the suburbs. The suburbs are associated with lower economic status. Tomorrow I'll be there in Praça Zumbi for sure, says the young man talking about this demonstration that he was going to go to. Racists are always the other people. It's like, I'm not racist, it's that guy over there. The Research Institute Data Popular found troubling numbers about how the Brazilian population sees the issue of racism in the country. 92% believe that there is racism in Brazil, but only 1.3% consider themselves racist. 92 million adults have witnessed a white Brazilian refer to a black person as a monkey. Only 12% took action against this type of incident. 17% of white men would not want their daughter to marry a black man. Data Popular interviewed 2017 people in 53 cities in Brazil between January 15th and February 12th. Again, I think this is from 2014. Let's see. This is going through the Cláudia Ferreira situation again. The services assistant Cláudia da Silva Ferreira died on February 16th on a Sunday, after taking 2 rifle shots during a police operation in Morro Congonha in the Madureira North Zone area of Rio de Janeiro. She had gone to a bakery to buy bread and bologna when she got shot. According to witnesses, she was still alive when she was rescued by military police and taken to the hospital. Along the way, the trunk of the van opened and Cláudia, hanging by her clothing, was dragged on the asphalt for at least 350 meters. The 3 military police who rescued the woman were held at the Complexo Penitenciário de Jerecinó in Presídio de Bangu No. 8, but last Sunday were released for lack of evidence as the authorship of the shots that hit Cláudia. They argued that they placed the cleaning assistant in the trunk due to the inability of opening the side door of the car, which was surrounded by angry residents. The murder sparked angry demonstrations from entities of civil society and authorities. The governor of Rio de Janeiro at the time, Sergio Cabral, rated the conduct of the military police as disgusting and inhumane. President Dilma Rousseff, who was president at the time, posted on a social network that Claudia's death shocked the country. Feliciano investigated for discrimination. In a decision signed yesterday, again, this is from 2014, the minister Guilmar Mendes of the Supreme Federal Court ruled that the military police hear the testimony of Deputy Marco Feliciano in 30 days. Now, I'm not going to get into this right now. It's just another situation where a Brazilian politician made really horrific remarks about people who follow Afro-Brazilian religions. This is something else I have to get into another time. This is another way that a lot of the Black population is repressed in this country, because Afro-Brazilian religions such as candomblé, people who practice candomblé here, their temples, their sacred items, you know, themselves, they're constantly under attack because Brazilian society does not like seeing Afro-Brazilian religions. That's something else I have to get into here, this question of religious intolerance. It's another thing that affects a lot of Black people here. And believe it or not, there's actually a lot of white people involved in the candomblé and Umbanda religions that, you know, are based on the Yoruba religion coming out of Nigeria. And that's another thing I'll have to get into another time. But for now, I just wanted to introduce the idea that for many years in this country, people believed this country was a racial democracy, even with, they know that within their families, they've heard racist comments, they've said racist comments, they've heard people they know say racist comments, they've seen people call other people monkey, they've seen the gestures and the behavior that suggests that Black people don't belong in certain parts of a city. So it's like, how do you buy into a racial democracy myth when you see this every day? Again, people know 92% of Brazilians believe racism exists, but it's always somebody else. 1.3% consider themselves actually racist. So I just wanted to get into this because it lays the groundwork for other things that I'm going to be talking about in the future. But this is how oftentimes how race works in Brazil. This is changing. And as I said, there's another study that came out recently that showed there's more and more people who are willing to admit that they harbor racist sentiments. But this is something I needed to discuss now because it's in order to understand how race works and studying race from studying Brazil from a racial perspective. These are just some concepts you have to have in your mind, how this disconnect between, yeah, we live in a racist society, but I'm not racist, right? Anyway, I will leave the links to many of these articles in the description box. If you like this article, if you like this video and the previous video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. You know, give the video a thumbs up, and feel free to share this video because this is specifically what I talk about, Brazil from the perspective of race in the English language. You know, there's a lot of good material out there already, but this is what my website, blackwomanofbrazil.co, and this channel, Black Brazil Today, is specifically all about. So that's going to close out this video, and I'll see you guys next time.